The recent calls to defund the police are intrinsically tied to the abolition of the prison industrial complex. While the police exist to protect the property of wealthy white people, the prison industrial complex erases, subjugates, and profits off the lives of Black and brown people. In our last video, we spoke about the current abolitionist movement, calling for the termination of the lethal police state. Part 2 of the Visions of Abolition series will cover the history and logic of the modern prison, the failure of past reform efforts, fears of violent crime, racial capitalism and the neoliberal order, alternatives to punitive justice, and resources and action steps on what you can do to stay involved. What policies created the modern prison, and why should we abolish it?
Prisons haven't been around that long, but the modern prison as we know it really doesn't begin to the 1970s. Throughout much of the 20th century, by the early 70s, there were like 300,000 people in prisons. Right now, there's 2.5 million. So when we talk about the prison industrial complex, the modern prison as we know it, we're only talking about an institution that is less than 50 years old. One, there was an economic crisis in the early 1970s where massive unemployment meant you need to figure out something to put people back to work. There'll be a whole propaganda campaign saying, look, these Negroes out here cutting white people's throats. You're living in a gated community. You don't think they're gonna get on a bus and go out there and kill and rape your daughter and kill you? Your gated community is not safe. Vote for this, and I promise you, we'll build more prisons, put those Negroes in there. And people voted for it.
I think a major reason why we need to abolish it is because it's meant to disappear people. It's a part of settler colonial logic that says people no longer matter. They need to be displaced and they need to be disappeared and ignored and removed from society. And that's inhumane. It's also important, are we here to actually rehabilitate and even treat the perpetrator with some humanity? And that's difficult for, I'm sure, many to swallow, but we still live in a world where people are human. And you just throw someone in a cage, you treat them as if they're not human. And we have to get away from that whole idea.
We're told that prisons are meant to rehabilitate people, but how do they fail at this supposed goal? What questions should we be asking ourselves when assessing the outcomes of the prison industrial complex, or PIC?
Are they effective? Do prisons and jails actually build more safety? I would say no, right? So many of the harms and the abuses and the horrible, scary things continue to happen. And they're going to continue to happen because we're not addressing the root issues. For me, it starts, prisons and jails start becoming really fragile, right? They start kind of falling apart. The case for them starts falling apart slowly.
You talk to a lot of folks who've been in and out of prison, they learn further criminal activities behind jail. They don't have education, they're not rehabilitated, they didn't get the emotional support, the mental support, psychiatric support that they needed behind prison walls, right? So what then is the point? This is why you need to abolish them.
If that is the sort of premise we're operating in, then we should see prisons and jails as illegitimate entities. And if they're illegitimate and harmful and ineffective in actually building safer communities, then I actually think there's a lot of reasons to start challenging their existence altogether. The majority of people in our population who are not directly impacted by jails and prisons might actually not really understand what's at stake if these illegitimate, harmful institutions continue to expand and beef up and have more power over policy makers, over politicians, over, people with power.
I understood the prison industrial complex later on in life, but for me, my interaction with it as a Black immigrant, my family is from Haiti, and I remember growing up and having my uncles, it'd be 1 minute they were here, and then the next week I'll be like, oh, where's Uncle so-and-so? And for me as a child, I was just these people are literally tearing my family up because my uncles are no longer here to take me to where I need to be.
After looking at the destruction the PIC inflicts on Black communities, some choose to advocate for reform. Let's talk about reform efforts in the prison industry. Why do they not work? How do calls for reform fundamentally differ from calls for abolition? Can we ever design a humane prison?
It's impossible to make prisons humane because that's not what they're designed to do. And let's talk about what kinds of reforms people have on their mind. Roll back the mandatory minimums, for example. Provide better health care. Maybe create more single cells. It's still in cages.
Countries that have, we might say, more, I'll put in air quotes, humane treatments of imprisoned peoples they're still in prison. They might have better educational system. It's still prison. It didn't change. It's like, yeah, we have a better form of slavery over here. So, all right.
Reform is never intended to be transformative. Having said that, let me just be clear. There's a difference between making the argument that reforms don't work and saying we don't want any reforms at all. You can do both things at once. Say we don't support reform as a solution, but we're also not against trying to make life a little better for people under these circumstances that are inhumane.
When our team was conducting research on what to focus this series on, one of the most common questions we received was about serial killers in a prison-free world. Like we mentioned in part 1 of this series, shows glorifying police play a huge role in society's fear of violent crime. How can we address this concern?
This language, which I'm going to share with you and with everyone, is called hegemony. It's Hegemony. So to study and to understand like what hegemony is to understand that there's literally a control of population over like a social group over another group. This usually most of the time happens in like popular education, right? Or like the media, or just how things, you wake up one day and this is just how it is.
I think the fact that like Americans love all these serial killer, like it's like the #1 genre in our country, it is so telling. It is so telling. It is obsessive. Our culture is obsessed with that whole chaos, right? Of like the sick mind.
Waste of time imagining criminals will run amok and will be just like those dystopian movies we spend too much time watching, where it's like no law and order and people in trucks are just shooting each other and, looking like wild animals. That's the image. And that works in terms of generating fear.
We need to challenge what we hear of the sort of categories of criminality. Yes, there are people who have done really horrific, harmful things in and out of jails. There are horrific people who are in our governments creating laws, cutting checks, making immense decisions on our behalf. We're also horrible people who are responsible for death. But we need to actually start looking at the data and actually realize that we're contending with the fact that it's a very small minority of people that are currently in jails and prisons that are actually the murderers that people have so many concerns around.
Well, the question that people don't really always ask, the serial killer question always comes up. It's always like the first response. But let's think for a second. Okay, how do you become a serial killer? You become a serial killer because you've killed more than one. Well, where were the police? If we had effective law enforcement, they couldn't get past one. So something is wrong in terms of even the way we protect ourselves. So the fact of the matter is that the people who end up becoming serial killers also suffer from a certain kind of trauma, because we live in a society that's traumatized always, at every single level. Patriarchy is a form of trauma that's imposed on it. Racism is a trauma both on the victim, but also those who believe that somehow their humanity is tied to the subordination of other people, that they can't be human without it. That's some sickness. Racism is both a structural condition, a form of accumulation, a form of extraction, and the impact it has on all of us is devastating, right? And that includes the police.
Capitalism and the PIC feed off each other, creating an industry that thrives off the hyper-exploitation of incarcerated people. The system prioritizes profit over respect for human life and actual rehabilitation. This begs the question, who is profiting from this massive industry? And what do these money-making systems look like?
It is an extremely, extremely, extremely profitable bureaucracy. There is a lawyer, Alec Karkatsanis, who does really brilliant work around this. He actually doesn't call it the criminal justice system. He actually calls it the punishment bureaucracy system. This is not just for private prisons. This is just in general, right? For prisons, jails, public, private. Because in a lot of ways, there's not much distinction in how things go down. But there's a lot of money to be made in this industry. You have to pay for every single thing. And the reason I mention that is because it begs the question, who is making money off of that? And of course, it's needless to say, the inflation is quite horrific. You're looking at something like $30 for just some donuts. That is not acceptable. It should not be a business. It should not be a profitable business to throw people away from their communities, dispose of them, and sort of kind of lock it up and throw the key. That is a world that we should not be okay with living in. You have white man entrepreneurs making millions and millions of dollars off of cannabis, of the emerging, booming cannabis industry in this country, while there has been no intent of releasing the millions of people that are in jail, in prison, because of cannabis-related situations.
What we have seen is the neoliberal order that monetizes everything, including prison construction. When I say prison construction, I'm not talking about just private prisons. There's a way in which the neoliberal order also is reflected in the creation of state and federal prisons that are making companies like G4S billions of dollars. And they take that money and they park it offshore. That's the reality. So you don't want abolition? I'm like, you can unravel all that stuff. All of it.
It's capitalism. It's money that drives the prison industrial complex. For it to exist, it's like another form of slavery, literally using Black bodies for labor and to be able to like continue this complex. So it's like, it's no longer that somebody has done something wrong to be in the jail. And maybe, sure, that might be true too, right? But it's now like, whatever it is that you do, you're gonna go to prison, you're gonna go to jail, and we're gonna make money off of you. It's literally perpetuating a cycle of poverty. The prison industrial complex is literally a cycle that perpetuates violence. And for anyone who cares, is do you want to perpetuate violence or do you want to perpetuate healing? It's very that straightforward.
How can we move away from punitive justice structures? What other systems can we look towards that break the cycle of harm that the PIC inflicts?
In fact, when we looked at when harm happens in a community, when we punish people who are like used to trauma, who have gone through generational trauma, and who are like constantly under attack with oppression, what that does is that it just continues to perpetuate the cycle of violence. That's what like the policing state does. Whereas with restorative justice and transformative justice, what that would mean is that not only is it connecting people with accountability in a different way, but it's connecting people to like, all right, what happened? What was the harm? What was the tension? What is it that happened and how can it be repaired? And so restorative justice is more focused on repairing the harm than just punishing the person. Because once somebody goes into policing, whether it's in the schoolhouse, whether it's in the hospital, whether it's in like social work, wherever like the policing is happening, it literally perpetuates like a cycle of like, not just like violence, but it perpetuates it in a way where it's like, there's no accountability, you know? The who holds it is also like, there's like a shifting of power. Usually we're like, oh, we need like if you're a young person, you're like, we need an adult to hold it, you know? Or if you're like a parent, you're like, I need the principal to hold it. Or if you're like a regular like citizen, right? You're like, oh, I need the police to hold, like whatever, right? You're like, I need an authority to hold it. Whereas with peacekeeping and circle keeping, as long as you're trained in the formality of circle keeping and peacekeeping, you can do that. A peacekeeper could be an elder of a community, it could be a young person, it could be a parent, it could be anyone who's like of authority that has like that passion and that drive to be able to have that principle of like, there's a harm that's happened in our community and we need to repair it. And the reparations and the repairing of the harm will take two people or more, a whole community. And we're not just focusing on like the survivor, but we're really making it the person who did the harm and the survivor coming together, if that is what's possible, right? Because sometimes that may not be possible. But it's not complicated. It's very clear, is that there's a cycle of abuse, and at some point we have to be able to stop it and create a different avenue for real restoration and real healing and real justice. And that's what restorative justice does. It gives you the ability to just dream, right? And to dream in a different way.
We know that we live in culture, which is why is so prevalent, or sexual abuse. We know that, right? And we need to ask ourselves, are we gonna jail every person that commits these harms, or are we committed to transforming our society so that these harms no longer happen?
Also with transformative justice, it's not just repair the harm between two people, but it's repairing the harm done, generational harm. And so that goes back into like systemic work that then has to happen to uproot it and to shift it totally.
The racists, I'm not for racists going to prison, because I'm not for anyone going to prison, but I'm for getting rid of racism. And I'm for the racists having to confront directly in the most intimate public setting the people who they harmed, not just the families, but all of us.
After watching this video, what are some key action steps people can take to stay involved and informed on the abolition movement?
Continuing to work and act on the ground and using arts and other forms of imagining a new world are important. You need writers, you need artists, you need activists out here in the streets to continue to demand justice.
First of all, join an organization. That's very important. Political resistance, movement for Black lives, And I would really recommend the series, just as a beginning, as an opening, the series of essays on Medium called Abolition for the People. It was curated by Colin Kaepernick.
One of the first books that I read that really politicized me was the autobiography of Malcolm X. Really politicized me to understand what transformation could look like.
Again, the work of Critical Resistance, the work of Mariame Kaba, the work of Adrienne Maree Brown, Carceral Capitalism by Jackie Wang is really, really, really solid. The End of Policing by Alex Vital. There's lots of people, but I promise that as soon as you get into the world of each of these, you will then find more and more resources.
Calls to abolish not only the prison industrial complex, but also all forms of oppression can initially seem overwhelming. How can we remain hopeful in this fight for liberation?
I was a young person in the 70s. And so I've seen all of this and I've seen how far we've come. A handful of people talk about abolition in the 70s and they were considered crazy. Right now in 2021, it is increasingly becoming part of a new common sense. And let's face it, the 26 million people who showed up in protesting the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery in the spring of 2020, a good number of them, I don't know what percentage, actually saw themselves as abolitionists or confronted the possibility of abolition for the first time. So there's been a sea change. And I think not only can we win, but we don't have a choice if we're going to survive as a planet.
Black is like the magic's like a spell. My brothers went to heaven, the police going to, yeah, they're going to. Hello, operator, emergency hotline. If I say that I can't breathe, will I become a jawline? Up to see the movie, line up to see the act. The officers are scheming to cover